Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Wow, powerful. Thank you. Powerful second lecture to the series. And yeah, there's so much to unpack and uncover in this Q&A.
Yeah.
I love how you've managed to outline these phases of education and bring out the antagonisms that they have towards African culture.
Right.
I think that when you have these clear features that contrast, you can begin to understand the impact these systems have had on our psyche and psychology, particularly. So now this is the second segment of the event where I want to take a few moments to again drill down into some of the points that Prof has brought out and talk to him personally before I come to you guys, our audience, with your thoughts and questions. So please have your questions prepared and ready. I'm going to be about 10 or 15 minutes and then I'm going to hand over to you guys for Q&A. And Prof, be ready. I have 3 pages of notes here, so I'm going to be moving pretty fast and so fascinating. The first point I want to bring out is maybe on the last 2 points you made. First, the one about globalization, and just thinking about being in the phase of globalization and the hallmarks and pillars of globalization, and how much that is tied into capitalist modalities and the philosophy of competition, right? Is that one of the central problems of instituting a Pan-African education, an African education that goes back to what you call bush or indigenous education?
Right.
Second question I had to tag on that is, when you talk about institutionalizing Pan-African education, what is the process for that?
Okay. Two good questions. Globalization, I call it hegemony at this point in time. There's an active movement to, I don't want to say Americanize, but to Westernize the world. There's an active movement. And that is tied in, of course, with capitalism. Capitalism, the movement of goods, services, the movement of industries, and so forth. And media is a big aspect of this. That has become global, that's become hegemonic. And we can see that as a challenge to this Pan-African educational system. It's a challenge because when it comes to financing educational projects, the capitalists have the money. You know, the African Union now has what we call Pan-African universities. But when you look at how those Pan-African universities are financed, they are financed mostly by Northerners. And my argument is that these people are not going to finance your educational institution if it's not to their advantage. For example, they will support those programs that already helps them. They will support those projects that already help them. So African people have to be very astute about that. I don't think Pan-African education is against globalization. It is simply saying African people's culture, African people's humanity, African people's personality should not be consumed. It should have an impact on that globalization, if only to humanize that globalization. A Pan-African university is, to a certain extent, a global event because it's talking about the education of African people, not only on the continent, but also in the diaspora. And we believe that if the continent has its house in order, that will have positive ripple effects on the African diaspora in Britain, in the United States, in Brazil, and wherever else we are scattered.
Mm.
We believe that because in the 1960s, when Africa was getting its independence, it had a positive ripple effect worldwide. But as Africa began to go down in economics, in politics in the 70s and 80s, that was also reflected negatively on the African diaspora outside.
Mm.
What was the second question?
Well, the second question was around the process of institutionalizing.
The process of that's a hard one. That's a hard one, right?
Yeah,
but I think it has already started.
Sorry?
But I think it has already started. But I mean, there has to be some political aspects for it to happen. For example, the African universities that AU has right now is sponsored by northern countries. Maybe it will function better if we're talking about Africa having one currency, Africa having one citizenship, Africa having a coordinated economic plan,
Right.
That will have a dent in terms of dependence, economic dependence on the outside. But right now we have varied currencies. I take students to Ghana, we have problems going to Ivory Coast,
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that because this seems to be all tied up in funding, right? And when we talk about globalization and capitalism, that naturally has to be the mode in which we produce societies, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we produce our systems.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're tying the institutionalized process to globalization, then I think we get onto that track, right? We get into the modality, which is really different. And I note that your frustrations with the AU and certainly about funding and the source of this you seem to be suggesting goes back to economic independence, cutting economic ties, and making sure that we can fund and resource our own institutions.
Also an institution like yours could help. I think that if African people were educated to transcend their macro-nationalisms, to transcend their Francophone, Anglophone, Lusophone nationalisms, I think we'll begin to think much at a broader level. So education becomes very, very crucial.
Well, I was going to ask you that actually. It wasn't my next question, but I'll go to this one. Is because I don't know what comes first. Is it African unity, then our education system, or the education system to get to African unity? I know it might sound like
no. I think you're right. We face that problem.
But isn't the problem that we don't have a unified continent yet and a Pan-African identity to speak of?
That's right. I mean, if you look at integration theories, some people will say economics first will come first. Some people will argue politics will come first, with political integration, economic integration will come next. I come from an eclectic background. I'm talking about political economy, right? The intersection of these two. And to achieve that, educational institutions become crucial. So it should be an integrated system, not one or the other. Not politics and then economics, not economics and then politics. How about the intersection, the integration of all those forces together? That's what will happen. But you see what happened in the 1960s and 1970s? Of course, you had the radical group, the Casablanca group, that wanted radical stuff. Then they have the what? Moravia group that was, you know, but that was basically a reflection of the West and the East. We have African people who have to learn how to transcend, negotiate those two forces and have a vision.
Yeah,
that is continental.
absolutely. So
That's what we have.
I think my worry is, I mean, having done this work for a little while, my worry is trying to convince someone to transcend beyond their micronationalisms, as you say, onto something that's not yet really an institutional or economic political concept.
That's why I'm starting with the educational institutions. Because I think if you and I go to the same school, we read the same books, we participate in the same curriculum. I'm talking about formal curriculum as well as informal curriculum, hidden curriculum, for example. By the time we finish with you, you would have transcended some of your original macro nationalisms. That's the way it is. Mixed schools equals to mixed bloods to a certain extent. Why don't we try to integrate our schools? Teacher training colleges, for example. What do we teach our children? What books do they use? What strategies do we use? You know, I gave some examples in the book where, you know, in Ghana, for example, the teacher doesn't care which ethnic group you're coming from. He's talking, you know, he's teaching Marxist or he's teaching historical dialecticism. That's what it is, you know. By the time you finish with you, your reasoning has changed. Your reasoning has been affected. That's what schools should do.
It's funny you mentioned Marx because I can see a lot of dialectics in the conversation that we're having.
Is that right?
I can definitely see this dialectical tension between bridging the gap between becoming Pan-Africanism, but that not yet being an institutional concept. But let me move away from that because we could spend the next day on that. But I want to talk about assimilation. And obviously this colonial education has hooked us on a very deep, cerebral, psychological level.
Right.
And I want to ask you what advice you would give to whether it's activists, teachers, or movements from a policy perspective, right? So wherever we find ourselves in the world, what could we do from a policy perspective to begin to break some of these assimilalist boundaries that we have in our minds?
I think assimilation or accommodation or borrowings will always happen when people interact, when people come together. What I do not want to see is the wholesome swallowing, you know, wholesome consuming the African personality. You can be trained in China or Great Britain, or remember Great Britain is a small country, but they call it Great Britain. Why do?
Yeah.
We have to deal with concepts, right? Assimilation. How about accommodation? How about borrowing those things that enhance the African personality, you know? I think when Nkrumah talks about this in his conscientism, we have to look, Islam is not going to evaporate. Christianity is not going to evaporate in Africa, nor is animism going to evaporate. We have to deal with this triple heritage. Now we have the Chinese, maybe call it quadruple heritage, you know, but we have to deal with all of these forces, with all of these cultural inputs, but not at the expense of animism. not at the expense of what Kwame would call the personality. That has to inform the others also.
You're seeing more of a cohabitation between the Western and African religious forces and dogmas then, rather than an obliteration and a complete...
There you go. You use the word obliterate. I don't want to be obliterated.
Okay. Yeah, because
I want to
give you an example.
I want to inform the system. I want to inform the system. Make it the system more habitable for my people. Make it system more habitable for African people.
You see, I was going to ask this as well. Is this about replacement or hybrid? You see, and this is what I get really nervous again about hybrid systems.
Yeah.
I remember reading Garvey, and Garvey saying, well, from a technical point of view, if you want to be a technocrat, then there's universal knowledge. But then from a cultural and social perspective, you have to blend in your African knowledge, right? So you have to Africanize yourself, but along with how the world is industrializing and moving, so you play a part in the global economy. But I want to ask you this, because I'm in Portugal at the moment, right?
Lisbon.
I'm not in Lisbon. No, I'm actually near a place called Lagos, which had the first slave market in Europe.
Okay.
And I went to a museum there yesterday, and the museum had it explained on one of the plaques the process of assimilation, and we called it seasoning, actually, seasoning of slaves. Yeah. And one thing that I realized is that this assimilation and integration process was not just a colonial mechanism, but it was survival, right? And I'm saying that to say that today I can see the same with religion, right? And I can see the same with many of our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. This is a question of survival. It's not a question of being absolutely conscious of playing a role in the development of Pan-Africanism and African liberation. Many of our people are just trying to survive. And that's why we keep hold of our religions and so forth and so forth. And so how do we make that cut that tie, you know, that, I guess, that paternalistic link, so they can begin to go on the journey? That's the bit I'm struggling with.
I think surviving will become less important if we are talking from a power base, from a larger force. But right now they can play. They can play with Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is too small. They can play with Gambia. Gambia is what? Is, you know, that's a small city. There are small African countries that really do not matter. But if they were talking from a regional perspective, from a power perspective, they will go beyond survival. They will want to demand more rights. They will want to demand more space, right? That's what it is. That's what it is. And so in terms of large size, but also in terms of, Marcos would call it military power, we call it economic power. If we have those powers, we don't have to beg Portugal. We don't have to beg Great Britain, small island. We don't have to beg it. We don't have to. France will straighten up.
So you're linking this to military power also?
Psychological power, military power, economic power.
Okay.
Because if you remain balkanized, you can be manipulated, balkanized.
Right.
That's what Kwame was talking about.
Prof, I have one more question. I'm way over time because we have our audience. But the final question I have is about the first thing that you mentioned, which was Africans have their own traditional education systems. Yeah, rites of passage, right?
Yeah.
Now, I wholeheartedly agree with rites of passage, but I don't think many people understand what that is, right?
Okay. Okay.
What the pillars of rites of passage is, and what it means to have an African educational tradition, right? And you mentioned Okonkwo and Things Fall Apart. I think in that book, it does outline it. But if you could do that and just help us to juxtapose the Western and African educational systems, that would be great.
Okay. I think rites of passage are simply the series of steps that you take from one stage of development to another. In the Western system, they take it for granted, but it's a rite of passage. From elementary school to secondary school, you go through graduation, and from secondary school, you go to college, you go through those rituals. Rites of passage are those rituals that you partake in. Sometimes we are not even conscious of it. We just do it, We just do it. So African people have to be very, 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 very conscious. I think they have to be smart. They have to be conscious at everything that they do. When I graduate from high school, what does that mean? Which stage am I going into? And when I'm in that stage, what am I supposed to accomplish in order for me to become a citizen of Sierra Leone, a citizen of West Africa?
Yeah.
I want to be a citizen of the continent. No? I want to go beyond that. I want to be a citizen, a global African. I should be able to. So that takes some steps, but it also takes awareness. It also takes ritualisms that make you conscious of the stages that you're going through. Traditional education probably is anachronistic in a larger segment, even though it functioned very, very well among the Mandingo. Maybe it functioned very well among the Mendes in Sierra Leone. But Sierra Leone has 15 other ethnic groups. It has to be enlarged to negotiate, to be able to deal with all those diversity. And you can put it at the continental level. And you can put it at the global level also.
Do you know what? I think you make a really good point. I think the start of this could be a citizenship program from the AU, just thinking out loud on a policy idea. I know we have a unified passport or an African passport now.
Yeah.
Certainly, I don't think many of us in the diaspora know that we could get dual citizenship in many African countries. There's only 2 at the moment where, if I'm from Britain or France or the States, I can apply to become a citizen. I think that would, I guess, incentivize people to go through this rites of passage and African education process, because that sense of connection and belonging is really. Prof, listen, I can talk to you all day. I'm going to New York and come and see you. And,
thank you. Yes, sir.
Down and break bread. But I have to be mindful of our audience, and they've been fantastically patient. Apologies for taking a bit longer than I should have. And how the segment works is that if you have a question for Prof, raise your virtual hand, come off mute and on camera, and you can ask directly. Now, if you're not coming, and I will then try to blend in the questions from the chat during the Q&A session. Now, we've got about 30 or so minutes for this section. There are questions in the chat already, so I'm going to ask for everyone to keep their questions very succinct and brief, and I'm going to ask you, Prof, to keep your answers very succinct and brief. So let's start with Nana, who was here last time. I remember you, sir. Good to see you back again. Fire your question to Prof, please.
We can hear you.
The dreaded.
I was actually on mute. Yeah, sorry. Before I fire my question, let me just say something about what you just said about African diasporas who are not even aware that they can get other nationality and the motherland. Just to tell you that even as I speak now, the Ghana High Commission in UK is organizing such consultation on the 12th, how Africans in the diaspora can either resettle back home in the motherland or get the dual citizenship or African passport, Ghanaian passport to be specific. And without consulate number, mobile number that you can call. In fact, they are doing a consultation with others. So it is something that is coming on the 12th. And it's going to be Zoom. So I don't know if any.
Sorry, losing it. Mute again, Nana.
Yeah, I say I'm not sure if anybody on the forum now is aware of that. Other than that, I can pass it on to you, Nigel, and probably you'll be able to, I don't know if you've got a platform, what's a platform, and you can just spread it. It's a consultation the Ghana government is organizing now. For people in the diaspora. Yeah, so that is.
Try and find that link, that would be great.
Say that again.
So one of my colleagues is off to find the link as we speak. But if you have it after your question, then we'll definitely post it and send it to our database.
Yes, I have it on my phone now. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Question,
now,
super
now my question is now, I'm quite happy, and let me thank Prof for such wonderful enlightenment. And it is quite sad to know that the Arab slaves enslaved blacks, the Europeans enslaved blacks, and now we see the Chinese crippling in. Unfortunately, with all this, if I may ask, what will be or should be the first step for Africans towards raising this issue on the continental level? Because there are a lot of people on the continent that are pretty not aware of what is going on at all. Because Africa, with a population of about 1.3 billion internally, and extra millions externally, is only a continent that is not protected militarily or economically. What step, in your view, you think we should take first? Is it the education? I know you talked of integrating education and economics and political, but I think there must be a specific way that we take the first step. What do you suggest it is?
Thank you, Nana. Thank you for that.
Oh my God.
Professor.
That is heavy.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. So
that's a heavy one.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to designate you the president of the African Federation, right? This is in 2050. And what Nana is asking is your first policy recommendation. When you put your cabinet and government together, what's the first bill you're going to draft to bring the masses together? I think that's what Nana is asking. And it's an unbelievable question.
We are yearning for it.
It is an excellent question. One of the things that comes to mind is that a lot of Africans are not even aware of the 700-year history, 1700, 700 to 1400, and even to this point in time. What Africans are fed, not only on the continent, but over here in diaspora, that Islam is a peaceful religion, that it is not as bad as that. So one of the things that I will do, I advocate mass education. We have to disabuse this idea of Islam was a peaceful religion. To whom was it peaceful religion? Not to the people that were castrated, not to the Africans that were castrated, not the Africans that were killed in Iraq, in 800 because they rebelled against their enslavement. And you can go around from Oman to Zanzibar to the east coast of Africa. This history has to be made live to African people, not only over there, but in the diaspora also. So this idea about, oh, Islam was not so, but that is wrong history. You Google Islam and Black Africa, you will see, apart from some of the books I have mentioned here, you will see the damage that was done and the damage that is still done in Sudan. These people used to go to Darfur and raping African women, say, let's put some white blood into your whatever, That system has to be addressed. And I talk about critical integration, Islam is going to stay. But on what basis is it going to stay? Is it going to stay on the basis of looking down on animists? Is it going to stay by looking down on people that are not Islam, that they call, heathens or unbelievers? It has to be Africanized in such a way that, as Kwame Nkrumah said, that consensus, animism is not going to go, but they will have to be able to live with. So the first thing I would do, I've advocated in my book, mass education, not this elite education only. You know what I'm saying? Only those that go to Oxford, Cambridge, London School of Economics. I'm talking about mass education of girls, women, the masses of people, to be made aware about not only the Atlantic slave trade, but also the Arab participation, who have taken advantage, who have taken almost 1/3 of the continent. Now,
I have to say, I would be very worried about your cabinet with the North African comrades. You might cause a jihad with that one to start. But we get your point, and I'm going to move on to Darren. We've only got 20 minutes left. I can't.
Is that right? I mean, he also said something about the Chinese. That is also a factor. They are all over the continent. They're in Ghana, they're in Senegal, they're in Angola, they are all over the place. And African people have to be educated that their interests should be paramount also. We have been bamboozled by a lot of Atlantis paradigms, Atlantis stuff. Arabs, Europeans, now is the Chinese. What is going to happen is that the Chinese, some of them are going to stay in Africa. Some of them have become citizens. Some of them have married African women. Some of them are going to produce Afro-Chinese. How is Africa in the 21st century going to deal with that? We have to be ready for that intellectually, politically, psychologically, and so forth.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Yes.
And just before I go to Darren, there was a quick question. I'm hoping you can give a one-word answer to this. Are African degrees recognized by the West? So, if you get a degree from the University of Ghana or, Kwame Nkrumah University or East Africa or wherever, do they have value in capitalist Britain or the United States? Yes or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
Answers that one. And Darren, over to you.
It's colonial.
Good evening, all.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me properly?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Perfect. This just continued from the Islamic perspective that you were just mentioning.
Okay.
So like we all know that it's common knowledge that Christianity was used to kind of control Africans.
Right.
So why is it that although Islam kind of implemented the same thing, why is that played down or totally ignored?
Okay, very good question. Very good question. First and foremost is that the kind of industry that Arabic countries were engaged in is different from the industry that Western were engaged in. For example, they took a lot of Africans that became domestic servants, worked in the military, worked on their dates plantation. Additionally, Arabs took what? 2 to 1, 2 females to 1 male. West, the opposite, 2 males to 1 female. And if you look at animism and Islam closely, they intersect, they overlap. You understand? They overlap in this respect. Animism and Islam practice polygamy. So those things overlap like that. And some of the people that perpetuated Islam were non-European people, So there's a lot of those differences exist. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, when it comes down to the race idea, when it comes down to the perception of Arabs to Africans, it's not that different at all. The Arabs will call an African, Black African, abd, which simply means he's a slave, But we have those economic differences. Dates plantation was quite different from what? The plantations that were established in Brazil and the United States. And number of Africans that were taken were mostly female in the Arabic world. And of course, that gave rise to a lot of Afro-Asians. So that gave rise to a lot of, we might call amalgamation, or assimilation. While in the West, it was more industrial capitalism, and of course, the kind of agriculture, plantation agriculture that was established were quite different. And the Islam have this, that where if you're a Muslim, your piety is what matters more than your color. But we read deeper and say that that is not the case. So in terms of culture, there are some intersections between Islamic and traditional Africa. Polygamy is one of them. And other stuff, other ritualisms are much similar.
So, Prof, can I add a question in by Brother Kwaku?
Yes.
The Portuguese and Europeans introducing Christianity. So the point is on the Europeans going to use Christianity to enslave Africans. Can the professor speak to the fact that Ethiopia had declared Christianity 1,000 years before the European missionaries started coming to Africa?
That is true.
This is a debate about the origins of Christianity.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't get too much into that, but Africans can claim Christianity, There's a book called Christianity Before Christ. That's an African-American writing. But if you go deep into Egyptian history, Akhenaten, this is a pharaoh. And he was talking about one and only God way before this Western Christianity came to the picture, So the Africans were Christians before this Western Christianity. That's why I call it Western Christianity, because Christianity was there before. In fact, before the Europeans picked it up. If you go to the temples of Egypt, if you go to what we call the Book of the Dead, where the negative confessions are, we think that the 10 Commandments came from there. And if you read the Bible, they say Moses learned everything he could learn from the temples of Egypt, up to where he got his PhD, became a prophet, until he came out and led his people, away from the Pharaoh. But most of those things he learned from the temples of Egypt. So Christianity is really an African religion that was captured by the Western civilization. And Islam is derived from that. Is that not the case? So even before Ethiopia, if we go deep down into Egyptian history, we can find the roots of Christianity in the person like Akhenaten, and in the temples of Egypt, where foreigners came to go to school, they had to pass exams to be promoted from one state to the other, up to what we might call to the PhD today. Those institutions existed in the temples of Egypt. So even we talk about university education, it's not new to Africa. We had it before. In the temples of Egypt, we had it before, where people had to pass examination to go to the terminal degree.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, Pan-African education will expose some of these things, so the Africans are not miseducated about Christianity or even Islam.
Right. And I would also add as well, I mean, if anyone is anywhere near East Africa and wants to visit Ethiopia, places like Lalibela, for example, phenomenal history in terms of religious and ancestral history that is interwoven.
It is
indigenous culture and life, right? So I would strongly advise that. But I'm going to change tact a little bit, because we have a very serious question from Brother Daniel. For all the conversation and discussion we're having, aren't most of our African leaders corrupt? And aren't they behaving as neo-slaves and masters themselves? So what do we do about the leadership who are making these decisions on our behalf?
Yeah, I think most of the leaders are miseducated, if you don't mind me saying. Colonially educated, are not educated in the Pan-African sense of the word, like Kwame Nkrumah, like Patrice Lumumba, like Sekou Touré. I think they are educated in a micro way, in a macro way. That's why I want to open this up. This kleptomaniac African, Mobutu Sese Seko, in Congo, for example, how could you be so narrow-minded and be used by the West, by the CIA and the United States against your own people? That kind of education is what I'm talking about. Thinking of the individual himself as opposed to the larger Congolese nation, as opposed to the other 9 African countries that Congo is bordered by, as opposed to Patrice Lumumba's concept of a united Africa. We have to transcend our ethnic groups and so forth for the larger good. I think that's what Pan-African education does.
But Prof, can I wouldn't say push back, but can I delve a little deeper into that? Because when I think of someone like Kwame Nkrumah, who was first of all at Lincoln University, then came to LSE, right? And when we read his biography, it's essentially through Marcus Garvey and the Students' Union movement that he becomes, let's say, Pan-Africanized, right? To me, he's someone who still has that Western education, but he still has a Pan-African consciousness, right? So my question to you is, how do we bottle that which Nkrumah became to embody? And what was it that set him on the path and the course to fighting for African liberation?
Okay. I think Kwame Nkrumah was unique in this respect. He had influences like, what's his name? Nnamdi Azikiwe. He had another Ghanaian doctor that influenced him. And he read a lot. And when he was passing through London in 1935, that when Mussolini had invaded Ethiopia. And from that instant, he said, he's going to fight for Africa. Then, of course, Lincoln University, a couple of degrees, then University of Pennsylvania, and his activities, even when he was a student in Ghana, he was involved in student activities, in studying, in organizing. So it's unique. But most of us are not like that. That's why I'm talking about formalizing Pan-African education, formalizing the curriculum that will open up these ideas to some of us that are not as gifted as he was. You understand what I'm saying, right? Yes, formal curriculum as well as informal curriculum. If you're a principal of a high school, make sure that the staff is integrated. Make sure that there are classic books on African people that are imparted to the students. You understand? His autobiography is a good example. Maya Angelou is a good example. All these other African writers that challenge you, that makes you see who you are, that informs your identity, are crucial aspects of the curriculum. So Kwame is unique. You know, some of them are unique. Kwame Nkrumah comes one. Those people come one at a time. You know what I'm saying? But most of us have to be formally oriented. And the school can do a very good job at that. I've met more Africans at Syracuse University than I did over there, than I did in Africa. You know, that is to say, Africans from Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan. I thought I was in a Pan-African city. And we had exchange groups. You know, we had a study group, Pan-African study group. There's an economist there from Ghana. There's an economist there from Gambia. There's, you know.
That's wonderful.
If we can do that in our school system, I think that will expand our cultural awareness.
Sounds like I need to come and do my postgrad with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So we are 6 minutes from ending the session. So I have another question, but I want to give the opportunity if there is anyone else who wants to come off mute and talk to Prof before we close.
Yeah.
If not, I will go ahead and ask my question.
Okay.
Excuse me, I just wanted to ask one question.
Yes.
Who is that?
Saran Prabat.
All right, go ahead, sister.
My question was that education is indeed the key.
Yes.
But to be allowed, I say allowed, to do what we know is right for the mindset of the Africans in the continent and diaspora, we have to think, is this possible without the military might that actually holds down our economies and our education systems? It's like, who can fight best rules? And we have the great ideas, what we want to do, and we can do it. But there's this wall of nuclear power and sea power and air power and economic power that we have to consider before we get destroyed like Mali almost was.
I think your point is well taken. One of the things that comes to me is that when we have an African leader that talks like that talks about military power, that talks about economic power, that talks about political power, they get rid of him. I'm saying then our history, educated African people here as well as over there, have to be conscious of that history. Why was Marcus Garvey imprisoned? Why was Toussaint Louverture killed in prison? Why was Kwame Nkrumah overthrown? Why was Malcolm X killed? Why was Mobutu Sese Seko promoted? I think African people have to be conscious of their history and act upon that history with the vision of African unity. Those African leaders that have stood for the betterment of African people have always been destroyed, physically, in terms of politics, or in the media, for that matter. African people have to be literate in terms of their history. in terms of their vision. There have always been African people that have that vision. Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey was talking about industrialization, was talking about economic power. I agree with you. If we have that economic power, the United Nations will pay attention. Small Britain will pay attention. France will pay attention. I go to Senegal and I see farms in Senegal. I go to the Ivory Coast, I see plantations in Ivory Coast, French plantations that supply France with vegetables, fruits, and so forth. And I'm saying, how much are they paying these African workers? So my idea of Pan-African education is one of mass education, but it's going to be based on increasing the literacy of African people, not only over there, but also in the diaspora. If we can start with that, I think that will have a great impact on the other world regions. But if we remain balkanized, if we remain 55 states, if we remain 50 currencies or so, different foreign policies or so, we are going to be in this quagmire for a long time. So I'm looking for Pan-African education that liberates the mind, that educate us about the mistakes that we have made in the past, how our leaders are being treated, and which ones of our leaders are being promoted by New York Times, by Western media, and why are they doing that?
Thank you.